welcome back to Project Manta Ray. So this is the third video in the series. In the previous video we explored the concepts of users and tokens, and now we'll be covering how to actually publish an asset into Ocean Protocol. So in essence, what this means is that you will have your digital asset represented in the blockchain by a certain ID string, and in this case it's a decentralized ID or DID. And secondly, your digital asset must exist somewhere. So we're not actually storing the data or the train weights file into the blockchain, because the blockchain is not going to be the best place to store a huge amount of data. It's also immutable, so if there's any changes to this asset, then you would have to then create maybe a new asset. And for this reason, we are actually storing the digital asset itself. This should be stored at some URL. So this could be hosted by you in your private server, or it could be on maybe Amazon S3 or some other cloud provider. Thirdly, in a marketplace, you want to be able to discover this type of asset, and you want to make this, as the owner of this asset, you want to make it discoverable. And in this case, you want to enhance the ability of people to find your asset and to also understand what this asset is before actually maybe purchasing it. So we have a MongoDB driver for a database which stores the metadata of your asset. The metadata of your asset is any type of description, the name of the asset, the price of the asset, and other types of attributes that you would like to place on this asset to make it discoverable and make it visible for people to find in a marketplace. So with that said, let's dive into this third notebook. So the next notebook, publish and register. So with the previous notebook executed, we've now understood a little bit about the notion of a user, an account, and some of the different token aspects. So for example, Ocean token and testnet Ethereum. So with that in place, we can now move on and start doing some more interesting things, like actually publishing and registering an asset into Ocean Protocol. So in this notebook, we'll describe briefly some of the actual architecture behind Ocean Protocol. So as a publisher, you're taking the perspective of someone who has a digital asset. And the simplest case would be, let's say you have a data set and you would like to make this data set available into a marketplace using Ocean Protocol. And making available means that you would like to allow people to access this data set, essentially download that data set. And you would also like to receive some type of payment for that asset. And the payment would be coming in the form of Ocean token. So in order to accomplish this, you as a publisher will need access to two services. One of them is the metadata store, which is holding the metadata of the asset. And the metadata of an asset, again, is the description of the asset and the name of the asset and other attributes that you'd like to associate with that asset to make it visible and searchable by possible consumers. The second service that you'll need access to is the access control service, which is called Brizo. And this is to ensure that only the people that you want to have access to this asset can actually gain access to this asset. So that's a very brief overview here. In this image, we can see that your notebook here running is connected to this metadata store and Brizo. And if you remember back to the first video, we actually checked to make sure that these endpoints were alive and working. The other endpoints that we've connected to, again, just to reiterate, are the actual blockchain itself and the secret store, which is holding private keys and decryption keys for certain aspects of the asset to keep everything secure. So here are here's the overview of the steps required to publish an asset. You'll need to prepare your files locally. You'll then need to prepare the metadata of the asset itself. So that's adding things like the description and tags and categories. Then you'll need to make your asset available as a URL. So that's a really important point, is that the digital assets in Ocean Protocol will not be uploaded into the blockchain because there are massive storage constraints with any blockchain project, and latency impacts as well, of course. So you will host this somewhere, and you could be also using, for example, your own local service, so your own local server rather, or some cloud server like S3 or Azure, or maybe even something like IPFS. As long as it's visible and accessible from the outside, then it's possible to access it with Ocean Protocol as well. So that's an important point, is that the access of an asset is controlled by this access control service, which is called Brizo, and that ensures that only the people that you want to have access to that actually gain access, and that's secured on chain. The next step is to register this metadata into the marketplace metadata store called Aquarius. And so any marketplace that would like to be hosted in a front end will need to run this as a service. So as a publisher, you could also act as a marketplace and run your own version of Aquarius. And that's something that you might be interested to do if you have a lot of assets. And then the final step in registering is actually to put the asset into the blockchain. And again, we're dealing with the asset in the form, so we're actually assigning it an ID string called a decentralized ID, and that's what's actually registered into the blockchain. Okay, so that's just a quick overview. Let's just dive in and see how that works in the Squid API. So the first thing we're going to do is import all the versions. I'll just clear the outputs again so it's a bit more clear regarding the steps I'm doing. So the first thing again is to import the squid-py API, Ocean class, the configuration, and instantiating Ocean as before. So I'll just go through this quite quickly. Just fire through these cells. And now we're ready to actually publish an asset as a publisher. So the first thing we need is the publisher account. And again, I'm just getting an account, and I'm getting the 0th account or the first account there. And I'm going to output some summary of your account. So you're assuming the role of this account essentially. And again, when you're running in a production environment, you'll want to actually use MetaMask, and then you would have your MetaMask account here and not this testnet account. And you would similarly have your own balance of Ethereum and Ocean token. So in this case, we see that we have a certain amount already pre-funded in this account. And now we're going to go ahead and create some metadata for the asset. And it's going to be even simpler than that. I'm going to actually get a sample asset that we've already prepared in the API, and that's just returning a dictionary, and that's all metadata is essentially. It's just a dictionary and a JSON file if you would store it, for example. And so we see a lot of attributes here, and let's just pick out a few that are maybe interesting. So for example, the author, categories, so it's typical things you would want to use to represent your asset or to make it discoverable by consumers. So then we also have a series of files, and these are the actual asset URLs. So we're not limited to simply one file. So if your data set has a training and test split and also some description and other, let's say, JSON files with labels, then you wouldn't have to make one single zip file. You could actually have each one as a separate file in this list. So in this case, we're just dealing with a test PDF and some zip file, some tar file just to play with, and a name. So then another interesting attribute is the price. So the price is set here in this metadata object itself in this dictionary. So let's go ahead and we're going to actually change the price of the asset. So because it's a dictionary, we can dynamically change things. And this might be interesting for you as a developer. If you'd like to change attributes in some type of scripted and automated way, this is a great way for you to do this just by changing directly the dictionary in Python, for example. So you'll see up here the price was formerly 23, and now I've changed it to 9, and I'm printing this attribute in the dictionary, and indeed it has changed to 9. So that will then make this asset available for purchase at a price of 9 ocean token. Another interesting attribute to investigate is again this files attribute. So files are a list of URLs with associated data. So there's more to a file than simply a URL. We also have things like the checksum, which is like a hash, and you can use that to verify that this file that you've downloaded is actually the file that was promised to you. So there's some security impacts there. Things like content length, and you can explore all of this in our in the documentation about this metadata structure. Okay, so with that said, let's actually go ahead and publish this asset finally. So that's this this next cell is actually calling the ocean.assets.create method. We're passing in the metadata, and I'm passing in my current account. So as a publisher, this is my account. And again, my account, let's just take a look again. What is my address? It is 0D4. So we'll just note that, because you as the account owner, and this is related to your blockchain identity, so if you have the private key, you are the owner of this account or this address. Only you have the power to control this asset. And of course, that's a very powerful thing, that you as an individual have the power to control this asset and who gains access to it. So we've now registered an asset, and we're now returning the ID string. So we have a decentralized identifier, and it starts with OP for Ocean Protocol, and then the hex string of this DID. So a DID is the ID of any asset in Ocean Protocol. A DID is resolved, or a DID is then resolved into a DDO, or a DID document, which then contains the entire description of that asset. And when I say entire description, I'm talking about more things than simply the metadata, because a DDO will also contain things like the access control that you place on this asset, and that's why a DDO is containing the metadata. So let's explore the returned object. So we see that we're returning the DDO as a dictionary. So a DDO is also a dictionary, and metadata is just an attribute inside that dictionary. So the DDO has an ID string again, so it's the same as before, and it has things like services. And these services are, for example, authorization, access, and metadata is actually an additional service that is attached to this DDO. So this metadata dictionary or JSON document is actually stored as a service, and it's located at this endpoint, which is Aquarius. So that's sort of providing the link between Brizo and Aquarius. So if you call the metadata endpoint, you will then get the metadata object. And now we're sort of leading up into how to make your asset discoverable. So the other crucial thing to note is that your files are secured such that the URLs are completely encrypted. And in fact, this entire attribute is encrypted. So that's an additional layer of security provided by the protocol. And this means that the files attribute is never even sent across an HTTP request, for example. It's completely encrypted in the client as a ciphertext, so that nobody, without access, nobody can see which URLs are potentially exposed, and they can't do, for example, a denial of service attack or anything like that. So that's the security provided by the protocol as well. So finally, what we'll do is we will verify that I'm the owner of this asset, and that is stored on chain. So I'm going to call the resolve method of the assets in Ocean, and I'm just going to pass in this DID that we've already registered. So again, that's E77. And we are retrieving this from the Aquarius metadata store, and we've now just returned the entire metadata object, and I'm just accessing in this print statement the name of that. And finally, I'm going to do a check on chain and make sure that I'm the owner. So if you do recall that my account address is 0D. So if you scroll up in this notebook, you can also confirm this. And indeed that I am the owner of this asset. So that means that this asset is owned by me, and therefore I am the person that can control access to this asset. And that's a really powerful thing. So I'm not dealing with some Web 2.0 marketplace. This is a decentralized marketplace where I have complete control over my assets. So that's a quick overview of publishing using the Manta Ray project. So again, just to quickly summarize, we created a publisher account up here using one of the pre-configured accounts in Manta Ray, and then we explored some of the metadata associated with an asset, and again, this is just a test asset, and we looked at how to change attributes in metadata, and then we actually published metadata by calling ocean.assets.create, and we passed in our account because we own this asset, and that's the important thing to note from this. And then we've actually confirmed that, if you recall back at the beginning of this video, we have these different endpoints. We've confirmed that our identity is associated with this asset, and actually our blockchain identity controls this asset. So I hope that was clear, and in the next video we'll look at how to then make use of this metadata to discover assets by searching. So I hope to see you in the next video.